Carry on. So today we're going to look at pre and perinatal psychology. So just a little overview. So what actually is it? So prenatal and perinatal psychology is the study of the foundations of health in body, mind, emotions, and in enduring response patterns to life. And it looks at psychological and psychophysiological effects and implications of the earliest experiences of the individual. So before the birth, so prenatal, so in the womb, as well as during and immediately after childbirth, which is known as the perinatal period, on health and learning ability of the individual and on their relationships. And this field of study has developed a variety of curative and preventative interventions for the unborn child, at childbirth, for the newborn, infants, and adults who are adversely affected by early prenatal and perinatal dysfunction and trauma. In easy terms, what does the child remember from life before birth? So basically, the study is all about the effects of the environment and what is going on for the baby inside the womb and then at the time of childbirth. So actually it covers many of the things that we've been looking at for the whole course. The effect of the mother's mental state, what's happening with her physically, what's happening in the environment around, and talking about the imprints that are left on the baby. So for example, you've got sounds. So for example, songs that a baby may hear in the womb, and then later on that baby remembers the songs or the tunes or the mantras, even though maybe the mother or father never sings those songs now. Then also the effect of lights. So it was found that they did studies where they would shine a light on the mother's belly, and that baby would kind of move towards the light. Then on foods, so in the womb, some babies were very happy when mother ate certain foods and not so much when she ate other foods. Then the emotions, so the emotions that were felt in the utero can be remembered. The emotions that the mother was feeling can also be remembered. And then it talks on the effect of children's thinking, feeling, and acting is all having a deep effect. So events that occur before birth and at the time of birth help to shape their personalities, drive, and ambitions. And this is what yoga has been saying forever. Okay, but this is the modern views, which is supporting that, which is great. Research shows that we can have a positive impact months before conception. And like I said, this is what yoga is also supporting. So yoga is saying to prepare before conception as much as possible. And of course, the shaping of the human mind. So everything that is affecting is, of course, forming what's going on for that baby and later on adult. All events remain in the mind and many can be later recollected. And this is part of the study, is that they found that even when the child is an adult, so they can still remember things that have happened to them at the time of childbirth or when they were in the womb, which is kind of amazing, and both positive and negative, of course. So especially with hypnosis and things like that, some of these memories that have been locked away can come out. So events affect us differently when we're in the first stages of life because we haven't got the defense mechanisms, the protection mechanisms, and we don't have any kind of fixed responses. So everything is influencing us really strongly. All things are directly affecting the fetus, and we can prevent the roots of serious personality problems by the way that we treat pregnant women and the babies in utero. And you can see it from, ancient times where women were looked after, they were cared for, they were kept away from violence, and it was understood that the events that were around were going to have an imprint on that child. So there's lots and lots of stories that are supporting this in all cultures, not only in Indian culture, in Chinese culture, in other countries and cultures. It's been well known about these imprints. So if we look at the modern history of pre and perinatal psychology, so Otto Rank was a disciple of Sigmund Freud, and he first raised the effect of birth experiences and trauma on one's mental state. And he wrote the book, The Trauma of Birth. Lots and lots of people have since continued with this kind of research. Some of the studies were very controversial, so some of them did include LSD, but lots of different studies were done, and a lot of research was done that you definitely wouldn't be allowed to do now. The Secret Life of the Unborn Child came out in the 80s, and that was kind of groundbreaking. The kind of things that he wrote about was very, very interesting, and I'd recommend that you have a read of this book as well, because he studied a lot the effect of the environment and the mother and the birth on the children. Then there's Birth Without Violence, which was specifically related a lot with how the birth was and going more towards like a natural, more gentle form of birthing. And also you've got Michel Odent, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly there, but he wrote on water birth and about births without as much intervention because they were found to be less traumatic. And of course, we know all the positives of a birth without a lot of interventions. So because of all this knowledge from this study of pre and perinatal psychology, especially perinatal psychology, it had a really big impact on the way that women give birth. So because of this knowledge, the natural birth, water births, gentle births started to come into practice, and birthing centers started and alternatives started coming up in hospitals. So looking at the effects on the unborn child, so an aware reacting human being from the 6th month is supported by studies, but most probably earlier, leading an active emotional life. So basically you want to think that from the beginnings everything is going in, and we know that everything is going in, but definitely from 6 months they're very, very aware of everything that is happening. The fetus can feel, see, hear, experience, and taste. This is well proven now. The feelings and perceptions shape his attitude and expectations of himself. So, if the mother is feeling very happy, then the baby will feel that. If the mother is feeling sad, the baby will feel that. So all these different feelings are going to be affecting. And then looking at the main source of those messages, as I've already mentioned, is the mother. So her main patterns of feeling are going to be deeply ingrained in that child. So for example, chronic anxiety or joy, positivity, they often say to certain people, oh, you're such a pessimist, or you're such an optimist, and a lot of that can be put down to the way that the parents were, or the way that the mother was in the pregnancy, and of course also the impact of how one is raised. So the mother has the tools to actively help to create a more balanced human through her thoughts and feelings, which are her main patterns of behavior. And the father's feelings are also having an impact, not as strongly as the mother, but especially the relationship that the father has with the mother. And there's been, a lot of studies coming out about the baby and the emotions that it felt towards the father related to how he was with his mother, with the baby's mother. So, for example, if the father wasn't very nice to the mother, the baby generally felt protective of its mother because it loves its mother, and sometimes didn't feel very positive towards the father. Whereas if the father was really loving of the mother, was really looking after her, making her feel very secure, then the baby also had that same feeling. So from the 5th week, they found that there are reflex actions in the baby. And from the 8th week, they've seen that the baby is moving different body parts. There's primitive body language. The baby also starts to express what it likes and dislikes. It can do it with like jerking and kicking. Here you see a poked fetus will move, even in the 8th week, which is really early on. And by the 4th month, there are facial expressions. And the 5th month, the baby becomes more sensitive to touch. So if you tickle a baby, it moves, or tickle the belly, the fetus can move. If the mother drinks really cold water, baby can kick. And they also did like some crazy research, which definitely wouldn't be allowed now, where they injected things into the amniotic fluid. So for example, they added saccharin, like some really sweet stuff, into the fluid, and the babies liked the taste. So they kept like swallowing more and more of the amniotic fluid, but they also like put some bad kind of taste, bad flavors into the amniotic fluid, and then the baby didn't like it, so it stopped swallowing, it pulled faces. So that's kind of really interesting, that already those likes and dislikes, and also that, you know, that joy of sugar was already there. And then 24th week, so the baby is listening continuously. It can feel the heartbeat, and that's why they say babies love the sling so much, because, or the wrap, because when baby is pressed against the mama's chest, baby can feel the heartbeat, and that's what baby was used to that whole time in utero. So it makes baby feel very secure, very comfortable. And we know this even if we don't have a baby in a sling or a wrap. If a baby is worried or crying and you just put baby on your chest, automatically they start to calm down because they feel that heartbeat, and it brings them a sense of comfort. And you also see like adults deal with monotonous sounds really well, you know, like that white noise. So the continuous kind of sound, because we're used to that. We've had that since we were in the womb, that continuous sound. In a way, it's kind of calming and soothing for us too. So some of the studies that have been there, so conditioned kicking from certain noises. So they started with having the noise, which created vibrations, and baby was kicking, and then they just had the vibrations, and baby still kicked because it had learned, it had had that conditioning, and it already started forming those likes and dislikes. Then this is a really interesting one, is the cigarette smoking. So this was about a woman who was smoking and she had to quit, and just the thought of the wanting to have a cigarette, and she had been smoking in her pregnancy, and baby had noticed how it felt when she had a cigarette. So when she started thinking about the cigarette, having a cigarette, the anxiety started to build in the baby, because it knew that when she has a cigarette, the oxygen level dropped. Obviously, baby didn't know what that was, but baby felt different. So that was really interesting, that just the thought in the mind of the mother was affecting the baby in some way. Then, of course, there's lots of stories about music and the effect of music on a baby. But here you can see like Vivaldi and Mozart made a baby really relaxed, whereas Beethoven, rock music, made a baby start to kick. Of course, some babies are going to like rock music over classical music too, but that was just the tendency. And you will all have heard of the research of Dr. Emoto about the crystals in the water. So if you haven't, it's basically where the imprint of, say, music or talking or so many things on water either turned the water crystals, like made them very beautiful, or it pretty much stopped the crystals coming at all. So different types of music also had that effect. So things like really heavy metal, death metal, the water didn't form into those crystals, whereas other certain types of music, they made the most beautiful, amazing crystals, like flakes. So it's interesting the effect of music. And of course, there's also lots of stories of, musicians who learnt music through being in utero. So they heard certain pieces and then they were able to play them as small children, which is kind of amazing. Then there's lots of stories and research about children that repeated certain words that were only spoken during the time of pregnancy. They were never spoken at another time. And there's also some interesting studies about newborns and especially the very tiny babies in the special neonatal wards. So the babies that needed that little bit more support. So what they did is they played the sound of the heartbeat in the ward. So the babies calmed down when they heard that heartbeat. So the whole nursery became calmer, which is kind of amazing. And then there's also studies that a pregnant mother, if she wakes very early in the morning, then her baby can also wake early. And same if the mother goes to bed late at night, then the baby can also, be when he grows up or she grows up, goes to bed late at night. But they've also found that the pregnant women, if the baby is very active at a certain time of the day in the womb, then often it's the same when they come out too. So if they're very, very active in the night, prepare yourself because they might not want to sleep much at night. So just a couple of stories for you to think about. So one is actually from this Dr. Thomas Fernie, and he had a child come to him, or the parents brought the child, and the child didn't speak at all. And the doctor was trying to figure out, what was the problem, why this child wasn't speaking, did it have some kind of problem? And then this doctor spoke in a different language. I can't remember if it was English or French, which was the main language. I think it was French, was the parents' language. So he spoke in the other language, English, and the child started speaking. And the parents were shocked, like, why is this child speaking now suddenly? Because it's another language. We never use this language at home. And then the mother remembered that when she was pregnant, she was working in a different place and she had to speak this language. So it got into this child's head that this is my language. So it wasn't interested in speaking the other one. So that was really interesting that the foundations of our, mother tongue are formed in utero. Then there's also been research about the way that babies are born, and especially if the umbilical cord is wrapped around the neck, many children will have problems with their throat. So they might have stuttering, where they can't say words completely, they kind of stop halfway. And also problems like having colds, coughs all the time, tendency to throat problems, which is really interesting that it can be because of that. Also, with premature births, babies that are born very young, so many of them, when they grow, they can feel rushed, like all the time, that like in an emergency, they have to be doing the things all the time. They can't really relax. Now, this other one's not related to premature birth, but I'll just tell you the story of it. This was about a 6-year-old, and he was having really bad nightmares, and he was talking in another language that they couldn't understand. And the parents were getting really scared, like, why is he having these nightmares suddenly? He never had these nightmares before. And then they realized, after talking to some people, that when she was pregnant, there were lots of problems, lots of complications, and baby was to be born, and they thought that the baby was going to die. So they were coming from a religious family, and they brought in the priest to start saying some prayers, some mantras, and so the priest spoke all these things, and it was in Latin. And actually, what they found out was that this boy, he was having nightmares and he was speaking in Latin, so he was remembering all of the things that had happened at the time of his very traumatic birth when he got close to death. So he kind of had to go through this to overcome, those imprints that were there at the time of birth. And then another story is about forceps. So forceps are those tongs that they use to pull babies out sometimes. And this was about a man who was, in his 30s, and he had very bad headaches. He'd always suffered from really bad headaches. And it was eventually found out when this doctor asked, about his birth, and he didn't really know anything about his birth, because a lot of times certain generations, they don't talk much about what happened, or, what kind of complications were there, or interventions, any of that. And so he asked his mother, and then his mother said, oh yes, it was very horrific, and they needed to use forceps to get you out, and it had like a little injury on your head, because it does. Forceps and vacuum can both damage the head. And he was actually had the headaches because of the forceps. So the effect had been there on his body. And he had to work on that. He had to kind of relive that time of the birth, and eventually he got over his headaches, which is kind of amazing. All these things are really amazing. These studies are very interesting. So basically you want to look at, like, what was the point of looking at all this kind of studies and research? So basically to have the positive life experiences and have a well-balanced child, you want to make sure that people are attached, securely attached. So mother and father are very attached. They're conscious and ready to have a baby. And when they do prepare for that conception, that time is tender and with full intentions, like we talked about in Yoga for Conception. Conception and implantation are easy, and the uterus is healthy and baby grows in a good spot. So those are things that we've been talking about all the time, but this is now supported by this field of research. So mother and father should be leading healthy lives with mild to moderate levels of stress. There should be good regular prenatal care. Birth should be optimal and natural and without any kind of interruptions. Okay, so not all these kind of interferences that can be there. Not too short and not too long, because if it's very short, it can also be very traumatic, and same with if it's too long. Baby shouldn't be separated. There should be lots of skin on skin. Baby should self-attach. So in preparation for breastfeeding, ideally baby should find the breast and the nipple, and that's the best way for the attachment. And there shouldn't be any difficulty in breastfeeding. These are the aims. Okay? The neonatal period should be relaxed and uneventful. Completely breastfed on demand until at least 6 months, and as I've mentioned before, it's recommended for breastfeeding up to 2 years or more. And of course, there's lots of different opinions on how long a baby or child should be feeding for, and there's lots of different styles now of weaning. So some babies are weaned by their mother, some mothers allow self-weaning, so allowing them to drink milk for as long as they want to and then stop. And then talking to baby. So by talking to the baby, it's giving security so that baby feels that it's loved, and that means that there's less anxiety. So telling baby it's wanted and loved is so important from the beginning. Having a healthy diet, having good music, good atmosphere, nice environment. It's all having